China.
I would be on the phone with China and making it clear, we are going to need to be in your country. You have to be open. You have to be clear. We have to know what's going on.
But Trump rolled over for the Chinese. He took their word for it.
The president tweeted, China has been working very hard to contain the coronavirus. The United States greatly appreciates their efforts and transparency.
China, I spoke with President Xi, and they're working very, very hard, and I think it's going to all work out fine.
Trump praised the Chinese 15 times in January and February as the coronavirus spread across the world.
It's a tough situation. I think they're doing a very good job.
Are you concerned about its potential impact on the global economy?
I think that China will do a very good job.
Trump never got a CDC team on the ground in China. And the travel ban he brags about? Trump let in 40,000 travelers from China into America after he signed it. Not exactly airtight. Look around. 22 million Americans are out of work, and we have more officially reported cases and deaths than any other country. Donald Trump left this country unprepared and unprotected for the worst public health and economic crisis in our lifetime. And now we're paying the price. All the negative ads in the world can't change the truth.
Joining our conversation.
Listen up! This may be one of the most important messages that has ever went out to the American public. Coming from the Windmill Ministries at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255, here at the St. Del's Recovery Shelter. Please listen. This is crucial. This is imperative. This is our future. Please listen.
And political strategist Steve Schmidt and NBC News correspondent Heidi Presbella. Steve Schmidt, it's a devastating political ad because it's all true.
Well, it's entirely true, and no amount of negative ads, as the Biden ad says, is going to change the truth about Donald Trump's incompetency at the response to what the ad correctly says is the worst public health and economic crises of our lifetime. And the simple truth, Nicole, is this, is Donald Trump ran for president of the United States on two propositions. One, I alone can fix it. And two, I'm going to make America great again. Well, it's 3 years on. We're slightly under 200 days from the election. More than 40,000 Americans are dead. This didn't have to be so. It's so because of the ineptitude of the White House response, the constant denial, the constant downplaying of this, of the danger of it, pushing it away, his serial unpreparedness and dishonesty with the American people about it. And now great suffering has been unleashed in this country. There's more to come. The economic distress will make the unemployment numbers higher than the Great Depression. We're going to wipe out millions of small businesses in this country as none of the federal programs are working like they're supposed to work. And so 4 years on from the promise of I'll make America great again and I alone can fix it, we can survey now the wreckage and the magnitude of the disaster in this country that has been wrought by the Trump presidency. And we see the consequences of putting an ill-tempered reality show television host who lacks the mental, the moral, and the intellectual skills and judgments to be the commander-in-chief of the most powerful nation on earth. And it should not go without mentioning that as we look around the world and we look at the response of nearly every other industrialized country, the United States response is the worst. The ineptitude of the federal government shows everybody around the world, from ally to adversary, what a clown show American governance has become in the third decade of the 21st century.
Heidi Presbella, I know you have a little bit of delay, so I'm going to ask you a question and then play you some tape and ask you to pick up right out of it. My question is this. Watching Trump, I mean, you could say a lot of those things about his response to Russia's attack on our democracy, his response to being caught red-handed extorting the leader of Ukraine, his response to the human suffering caused by his frivolous government shutdown. But when you want to know the answer to this question, how bad is it, you look at what his closest political allies say. Here's Chris Christie on the Sunday shows yesterday.
I think that's the wrong thing right now. I think what we should be continuing to emphasize is the president's role in trying to bring this pandemic under control, to assist the American people with the help that they need to be able to deal with it on both a personal and a professional level. And if it were up to me, I would say I would vote no on the right now in April having the Joe Biden China ads. There may be time for that, to discuss that later in the campaign, but I don't think now's the right time. Yeah, I think anything he does that looks political will be contrary to what the American people want from somebody who they're considering. This is about competence and moving the country forward.
Heidi.
I would say that's wise advice, because Chris Christie knows politics very well, and he knows that what this focus is going to do is to boomerang back on the president, to focus on what the president was doing politically in January, in February, when he was not having those meetings and having his whole focus on trying to prevent this outbreak. What was he doing? He was focused on the China trade deal. He was making very favorable comments, contrary to what he now says about the leader of China. He was making very flattering comments about President Xi. And if you think about it, this China, along with the wall, were really the pillars of what the president promised to do to get tough in his presidency. Here we are, January 2020, and he doesn't have anything to show for it as far as China goes. And you have all these manufacturers, all these farmers who've suffered from this trade war, and he's feeling a little bit desperate to get this deal done. And you line that up with his statement at the same time that our own CDC is trying to get in the door on the ground in China, instead of using the bully pulpit to pressure them to allow our public health officials to get on the ground and prevent this disaster. He's making very flattering comments about the leader of China. And that's why you've seen, just in a matter of days, this has opened the door for the president's adversaries to cut all of these ads, lining up these data points about what he's saying in himself.
Steve Schmidt, I think Chris Christie was doing something else. He has a direct line to this president, a direct line to his cell phone, to the Oval Office. He can reach anybody in that building he wants to. And I think what he was saying to Donald Trump is, don't go there. You are not whole on the question of China. There's tape, and people believe what they can see and hear with their own ears. And what they can see is Donald Trump saying on tape over and over again, not in any sort of hot mic moment, but to press crowds, which he's addicted to, like a moth to a flame. Oh, I trust China. They're being transparent. He was either taken for a total sucker or he's a big fat liar about what his motives were at the time. But I think Chris Christie is giving this president a big flashing red light. Don't go after Joe Biden on China, because you're much dirtier than he is there.
Well, it's got to be a painful moment for Chris Christie to have to sit there and defend the ineptitude of all of this, because we know firsthand that Chris Christie knows how to respond to a crisis. He did a very good job when Superstorm Sandy hit New Jersey. You saw him work with President Obama. You saw him put politics aside. The idea, though, that the president isn't political, the entire news conference isn't a news conference to inform the American people about a public health crisis that's killing Americans by the tens of thousands, and soon to exceed a casualty number that exceeds the total of the Vietnam War. Every day, it's misinformation, it's spin, it's the construction of an alternate reality to try to exculpate himself from the worst, most inept response that we've ever seen an American president commit to in a crisis ever. And so what we see is nothing but finger pointing, blame gaming in politics. And so Chris Christie's advice is as if it's taking place in an alternate reality, because the person he's directing it at certainly hasn't followed it ever, not for one day during the entire presidency, and certainly not for 1 minute in this entire crisis.
Steve Schmidt, Heidi Frisbella, thank you for making some TV from your living rooms with us. We're very grateful. Thank you, my friends. After the break, new reporting undercutting one of Trump's favorite methods of deflection. That story next.
That's deep. I mean deep. Now listen to this part.
Not have social.
Let's back up a little bit. Hope.
Why did you wait so long to warn them?
Who you with?
And why did you? Why did you wait so long
Who you
to
with?
warn them?
Who you with?
Why did you wait so long
Who are you
to
with?
warn them?
Who are you with?
And why did you
Yeah.
not have? Did you wait so long
Who are you
to
with?
warn them?
Who are you with?
And why did you?
Really, what difference does it make who you with? It was a question that needs to be addressed.
Not have social distancing until March 16th.
Who are you with?
I'm Weijia Jiang with CBS News.
So, if you look at what I did in terms of cutting off or banning.
Now, to your left, upper hand left screen, it says yesterday. So this was basically on the anniversary of the 25th year of the catastrophe that fell upon to the Oklahomians. Now keep in mind, whenever 168 people got snatched out of this country pertaining to the devastation that we've seen on live TV, basically, that was one of the biggest stories ever produced during the time that it come about of the Oklahoma incident. People wailed. They wailed and cried and lamented over so many innocent lives that had been snatched away from the American population. Today, in comparison to 168 people, we're looking at over 40,000 people that have went through similar situations. The only difference is we don't see mass real estate ruin like we did then versus what we're seeing today. In other words, if 168 people would have just suddenly disappeared off the planet because they suddenly had some sort of a illness, do you think that people would have responded differently? Why should we today respond any differently? My point, this is my point. Why should we respond any differently of the gross negligence that we have seen for the past 4 to 6 weeks? And I realize there were some ins and outs pertaining to questioning who was liable, what happened, who wasn't transparent versus who was transparent. But why would the American people react any differently today of the same 168 people that got snatched from us then versus today? The only difference is then versus today, the method, the technique is different. In other words, it could have been prevented. The Oklahoma explosion that happened in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, of seeing that catastrophic event that unleashed to society 25 years ago could have been prevented. This today could have been prevented. But we're looking at 40,000 people plus shutting down a whole government versus 168 people. So why should our response or our reaction be any different today versus than what it was then? It shouldn't be. A matter of fact, if the truth be known, our response should be 168 times stronger today of losing 40,000 people than what we ever thought about whenever the Oklahoma bombing took place. That literally turned America on its head whenever that occurred. Why should the response today be any less lenient than what it was then, 25 years ago? If anything, it should be 168 times greater today than what it was then. Because we have lost 40,000 people and not just 168 people. Come on. What is going on here pertaining to negligence? Pertaining to not being accurate, not being the watchman on the wall, not being the flagman, not giving out the alert to the American people that danger is coming, danger is coming, danger is coming. You know, whenever I worked the tornado damage, the first part of March, up in Nashville, Tennessee, Joliet, and also the Cookeville area, I got lots of testimonies from lots of people that claimed that they only had as little as a 2 to 3 minute warning towards preparing for the inedible. And of course, whenever the inedible hit, just like their house blowing up, just like a bomb hitting it, basically the only thing you can do is grin and bear it at that point in time, and whatever befalls upon your life is going to befall upon your life because you really didn't have no warning. There was no defense system set up to alert you, or it was a bad defense system, or that's what some of them tell me. I don't know. Maybe the weather people can verify that they had at least a 10 to 15 to 20 minute warning. I don't know. Maybe they can. But I'm using that in perspective of the professionals that we have hired to take care of us. And these weather people do announce themselves as being professional, just like scientists, just like doctors, just like nurses, just like other people that's associated with the CDC and other healthcare services, worldwide healthcare services. How come we expect any less out of these people today than what those people that recently went through the tornado damage, not only up here in Nashville, but also in Chattanooga, because they got hit last week of about 35 deaths, 30-something deaths last weekend. That was just as devastating. I know that those people was getting warnings last weekend, probably 4 or 5 hours, maybe 6 hours in advance, that the atmosphere was becoming abnormal. It was very unstable. And to start listening to your radio stations and listening to your whistle alerts and listening for your professional people of telling you what to do in the next few hours because of the weather. So why should we expect anything any different out of our politicians today, or our doctors, or our scientists that we paid to take care of us in the same incident towards warning us if there's incoming doom, imminent doom, dire doom? This guy right here, to the right, I don't think we've seen what kind of hot seat that he's fixing to be put in. He thought that he was in a hot seat regarding the Russia investigation. He thought that he was in a hot seat pertaining to the Ukraine investigation. But now, when you have 40,000 people that have suddenly disappeared off the planet, I don't think a hot seat is going to be in comparison to what he's fixing to have to face off on, especially with the year of election being so freshly branded into people's hearts and people's minds towards what we're still having to go through. The government has been shut down, folks. We've never seen anything like this before. And I'm not saying that the government wouldn't have had to have been shut down even in the month of latter part of January throughout February and March, but would we be seeing such of a death toll? Why should we be willing to sacrifice one thing if we're still having to do both towards the loss of life? We shouldn't. If we had good, steady professionalism of people that was supposed to be on the watch, the watchman on the wall that was supposed to be looking. That's the reason why we pay people the type of money that we pay them, is so that they can protect us, so that they can be on the front line, so that they can let us know ahead of time. Hey, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. Prepare yourselves. Get ready, get ready, get ready. We shouldn't have had to have lost 40,000 people, and we're not through with this thing yet. This thing is still unfolding. And we got a president that's still trying to pass the buck over to someone else. And there's no doubt the buck maybe should be passed a little bit, but the buck still stops at his desk. He is the president. He has failed the American people. Congress has failed the American people. A lot of your governors that was watching this too as well, because they have access to TV. They got access to MSNBC, just like I do. They got access to CNN. They got access to what goes on pertaining to national news. Not just local news, but national news. How come it took so much time is what this woman is wanting to know for there to be a positive response. Let's back it up and listen to it one more time because I want you to get the full effect of this.
China.
Let's back it up, back it up, back it up, right there.
The love it holds.
Why did you wait so long to warn them?
Who you with?
And why did you not have social distancing until March 16th?
Who you with?
I'm Weijia Jiang with CBS News.
So, if you look at what I did in terms of cutting off or banning China from coming in.
Chinese nationals. But by the way, not Americans who are also
Nice and
from
easy,
China.
nice and easy, just relax. I did a ban where I'm closing up the entire country. How many people died?
And that's a fair point.
How many people died in the United States? And yet I closed up the country, and I believe there were no deaths, 0 deaths at the time I closed up the country. Nobody was there. And you should say thank you very much for good judgment.
Hey, Donald Trump still doesn't have a very good answer to a very important question. Why didn't he do more to warn Americans about coronavirus as it spread in February? Donald Trump has sought to avoid accountability for what's been called a lost month or a lost two by deflecting blame and blaming others. One of his targets, the World Health Organization. He insists that they, not he, mismanaged the early stages of the crisis. But a brand new blockbuster piece of investigative reporting from the Washington Post undercuts one of Donald Trump's central defenses. The Post writes this, quote, more than a dozen U.S. researchers, physicians, and public health experts, many of them from the CDC, were working full-time at the Geneva headquarters of the World Health Organization as the novel coronavirus emerged late last year. And they transmitted real-time information about its discovery and spread in China to the Trump administration. That's according to U.S. officials and international officials. The presence of so many U.S. officials undercuts Trump's assertion that the World Health Organization's failure to communicate the extent of the threat is born of a desire to protect China that is largely responsible for the rapid spread of the virus in the U.S. The administration calls this report by the Post misleading and emphasizes that those staffers weren't decision makers and that there was a disconnect with WHO leadership. We are joined now by our friend, former Assistant Director for Counterintelligence at the FBI, Frank Figliuzzi. Frank Figliuzzi, you don't have to know a lot about epidemiology or the World Health Organization to know that this will boil down to, in the minds of the American public, what did he know and when did he know it, as well as what should he have known? These were people that may not have reported directly to him, but they certainly reported to Anthony Fauci, who reported to Secretary Azar, who had a direct line. Any secretary, cabinet secretary, has a direct line to any chief of staff, and they should have a direct line to a president on the eve of a pandemic.
Nicole, the what should he have known question is the most problematic for the president, because when you start scratching that surface and you bring up the facts, you understand that we lost our CDC representative in Beijing just a couple of months before the outbreak of the case. You understand that when he starts pointing to China as that scapegoat he's so desperate to find, we understand that there were reports to the State Department from our own embassy in Beijing that problems were occurring in the Wuhan lab. We understand when he points to the WHO, the World Health Organization, as the cause of all of this for failing to warn him. We learn what? U.S. citizens, officials stationed at the World Health Organization were sending warning flags to Washington, right? So what are we seeing now? We're seeing a desperate search for a scapegoat, and we're seeing a president, as he ramps up toward an election and his poll numbers are down, is going to be increasingly desperate to find that scapegoat. But every time he points at one, it points right back at his administration. They either can't message him correctly, his own economic advisors, his own intelligence community, all giving him memos, briefs, emails that we've got a threat coming at us, and he's not heeding the warning. So where is this going? If you're in law enforcement or your intelligence or domestic security, here's what I'm hearing, Nicole, from my law enforcement contacts. There's increasing concern about these protests that are spreading like a virus across the country, protesting public health measures, because we're seeing militia groups, we're seeing long guns, we're seeing Nazi symbols, we're seeing funding coming from where? Trump-associated donors, Koch brothers, Betsy DeVos, and that foundation. And so we're seeing a anti-science, anti-public health protest movement that actually is increasing exposure of law enforcement, and it puts law enforcement and mayors and governors in a trick bag, Nicole, because now they're forced to either take measures against protests that violate public health and safety, or they're accused of looking like anti-liberty, anti-free speech, anti-assembly. It's a magic potion that could get us to violence very, very quickly. I'm very concerned that we're entering the most volatile period of this president's administration.
And from you, that's saying something. You brought me to where I wanted to get you on the record, but let me just end with a two-part question for you. One, it strikes me that at any protest over any issue, the people who encounter or deal with the protesters in many instances for their own safety are law enforcement officials. So are you worried about this concentration of people not wearing masks in most instances coming face to face with law enforcement? And two, you started to talk about it, but if I could just pull the thread a little harder on what intersections you see with these, liberty protesters and other groups that have been agitated, that have made headlines during the 3 years of the Trump presidency.
So first, the law enforcement and paramedic and EMT issue, if you're going out and thinking about protesting, I want you to think about this. If you don't care about infecting yourself, understand that your police, your fire and rescue have better things to do than to babysit you because you're angry that you can't go out for an ice cream or get your hair done. So think about who you're exposing. Secondly, where this is all headed, the president has linked this stay-at-home issue to the Second Amendment. Remember that tweet in Virginia? Liberate Virginia. Your Second Amendment is under siege. That's going to motivate the crazies amongst us to do some very ugly things, and law enforcement's got to hunker down for that.
Frank Figliuzzi, we need to have you back. That's a longer and more important conversation. And we do know a lot about who Trump is talking to. He speaks to them in shorthand, and you're right, not even veiled messages. Frank Figliuzzi, thank you for spending some time with us. After the break, what Nancy Pelosi said about Donald Trump that set him off, but she wasn't the only one he went after this weekend. That story next.
The president is playing a double standard right now. He's trying to crawfish out of his own personal responsibilities about how that he did not do his job adequately in regard to letting people know that this was coming down the pike in the month of January, because they actually had the outbreak in November, probably the beginning part of November, maybe even earlier than November. So our intel should have been on top of understanding that this is going to be serious. This is really bad, okay? And now, not only the president's crawfishing on not wanting to be held accountable for not putting out the early warnings that he should have had, but now he's putting out gestures to the American people, planting seeds into their minds that your Second Amendment, your First Amendment, your other amendments are now being violated on account of your governors. So you talk about a double standard. You talk about burning the candle at both ends. First of all, we got a president that's not willing to stand up to his failures, to his accountabilities. And now we got a president that's passing the buck over to somebody else by telling the American people that your amendment rights are being violated. So yes, that is a recipe. That is a recipe for disaster that now law enforcement is going to have to gear up for. Because not just major protesting, but we're going to have probably, I hate to say it, and I'm not going to predict it because I don't want to speak things into existence. But we have a possibility of a formula that could reach the level of the civil rights movement back in the 60s. Whenever you start having burning buses, burning buildings, whenever you start having stuff like happened up in Missouri, or stuff that happened like out in LA pertaining to the LA riots, whenever you start having stuff like that happening all over the countryside because the people are pissed, the people are angry, then is when you have a formula of a catastrophe, disaster. Then is whenever the United States military has to basically be called in the regard towards marshaling these incidences to the point of bringing martial law into existence that will only exacerbate the problem that much further. Once more, the clown show that everybody thought was cool, the clown show that everybody thought was kind of halfway, I guess, maybe appealing to some, maybe entertaining to others, but sad to others. The clown show is now turning out to be more than just a clown show. Now the clown show is turning into something much, much more lethal than just something silly and stupid and goofy, especially whenever you have deceased grandmothers, deceased grandfathers, whenever you have deceased mothers and fathers, people on the front lines, doctors, nurses, first responders, whenever you have people that's dying of this coronavirus because they was not warned properly, effectively, efficiently. And like I said, it's one thing to have to shut down the government. And I realize that shutting down the government versus people's lives should have been the first and foremost thing that should have been on the president's mind, above and beyond sacrificing people's health. But why should we have to do both? We're not only having to sacrifice our economy towards failing in areas because of the coronavirus, COVID-19, but now we're having to sacrifice loved ones and friends and neighbors and people that we care about. That's adding that much more insult to misery. That's exacerbating the problem that much more. And then on top of that, you got a president that's stirring the pot by saying, oh, they're violating your amendment rights. They're violating your amendment rights. I'd be out there. I'd be protesting. I'd be going up against those governors if I was you. They're violating your, and at the same time, we have the real doctors, the real CDC, the real people that is still telling us ahead of time, wait a minute. You're doing this too early. You can't just walk out in front of this thing because if you do, we're going to have a second wave. So we're getting all these mixed messages it's just exacerbating the problem that much even worse. It's sad. We are in a very, very precocious area of undesirableness of not knowing what is going on, what is going to be going on, what are we going to have to face off on tomorrow, next week, what's going on in Memphis, what's going on in St. Louis, what's going on in New York, what's going on in Chicago, what's going on in LA, what's going on in our nursing homes, what's going on down in Louisiana, what's going on in our bigger cities like Houston and Dallas, what's going on in Miami. We've got all these uncertainties and a president that's stirring the pot. Now, with law enforcement, if you was with law enforcement, would you not be concerned in what you're seeing and what you're hearing? because this is unlike anything that the American people has ever had to deal with in the 21st century. A matter of fact, I don't think that we had to deal with anything this unstable in the 20th century. Because in the 20th century, in 1918, first of all, people had more sense than what they do today. Second of all, there wasn't all these drugs. There wasn't all these guns. People had morals. People had values. People was more homestead towards working on the farm than they was dependent upon the government. I mean, whenever I walked into Walmart yesterday, I think it was yesterday, it may have been the day before, it literally frightened me up here in Martin, Tennessee, because there wasn't not one hamburger left on the shelf towards getting hamburger meat as far as good meat. The majority of the shelves was riddled. Looked like that the store had basically almost been, I don't even know the right word. I guess raped would be the word that I'm looking for. Ravaged. I'm going to use that word. You could tell the store had been ravaged. And of course, whenever you go over there to the pharmaceutical department and you get to asking about masks, you get to asking about hand sanitizers, you go over to, what is it, aisle 5 or aisle 3, where they're supposed to have toilet paper. You know, there is no toilet paper. All the toilet paper's gone. And you start asking yourself, my God, this thing has really gotten out of proportion. And you know, you can have gasoline that's cheaper than water, but what good does it do if you're not supposed to be out there on the road traveling? Everything is upside down. It's crazy. You got farm milk farmers that's having to throw milk away right now because the restaurants ain't using it. You got farmers down in Homestead that's disking up cabbage and lettuce. I have never in my life seen things this disproportionalized as I have in my 59 years. And I ain't gonna lie to you, it's terrorizing. It is, it's terrorizing, because you start to think, if you're a leader, okay, if it's that way, if it was this way last week, if it's this way this week, and you know it's going to get worse next week, where's the end game to all this? Where is all this heading to? Is there going to be mass rioting? Are we talking about marshaling as far as martial law? Are we looking towards the catastrophe of a disaster here in our own United States? Because I've said all along that that's exactly what our enemies want us to do. If they can weaken us and get us to fighting again like we done back in the Civil War days, eventually, once we get tore down so much and weakened so much, they'll just come in and take us over because they like this property over here. They like our real estate. They like the fact that you can grow things. And we have Four Seasons. And we have Grand Canyon. And we got New York pertaining to the Statue of Liberty. We've had lots and lots of people that has hated our guts, but they love our real estate, man. Don't think for a second that they don't love our lakes and our rivers and our canyons and our gorges. Don't think for a second that they don't love it down there in Florida pertaining to all the skimpy hotel girls and all the steaks and the luxury items that America has been serving the American people now and the world for 30 plus years. Don't think for a second that they don't like that stuff, because they do. They just don't like our hypocrisy. And they don't like what we're supposed to stand for, which is the Lord Jesus Christ. That's the part that they don't like, pertaining to these communist-controlled countries. So as we get further and further into this, it's really disturbing. It's disturbing not on a level of just being cautious, but it's disturbing on the level of being terrorized, of the uncertainty of not knowing what's going to happen tomorrow or the day after tomorrow or the day after the day after tomorrow. Because I got news for you. You can't drink gas. You can't eat dollar bills. You can't do certain things, though you may have a pocket full of money, though you may have a big bank account, though you may have a fat Y2K or 401k or the stock market doing good, it only goes so far pertaining to survival and friendship. And once you exceed that survival and friendship, then you're talking about anarchy. Then you're talking about chaos. Then you're talking about an onslaught. Now that is a frightening thing to think about, regardless of what city or what town that you may live in.
A failure on the testing. Leaders. The president gets an F, a failure on the testing. The president gets an F, a failure on the testing. The president gets an F, a failure on the testing. Leaders take responsibility. So on the testing, leaders take responsibility. So I said he's a weak leader. Leaders take responsibility. So I said he's a weak leader. He doesn't take responsibility. He places. So I said he's a weak leader. He doesn't take responsibility. He places blames. So I said he's a weak leader. He doesn't take responsibility. He places blame on others. And not take responsibility. He places blame on others. Take responsibility. He places blame on others. And that might have been okay for before, but we cannot continue down a path that is, again, I'll come back to science, evidence, data on how we could go forward.
The Speaker of the House holding nothing back in her evaluation of the president's pandemic response. That was yesterday on Fox News, her first interview on that network since 2017. And the president was clearly unnerved by her appearance there. He tweeted this, quote, "Nervous Nancy is an inherently dumb person. She wasted all of her time on impeachment hoax. She will be overthrown, either by inside or out, just like her last time as Speaker." Inexplicably, in quotes, Wallace and Fox News are on a bad path, comma, watch. Wow. Someone should be worried about him. Joining our conversation, senior writer for Politico and MSNBC political contributor Jake Sherman. I mean, nanny poo-poo seems to be all he can muster against a pretty substantive and fact-based critique of Donald Trump's response that is sort of backed by weeks now of investigative reporting from your news organization, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, that his response has been an abysmal failure. And all he writes back is something about her being overthrown and Cole Prickly for a Fox News anchor he doesn't like. What does Pelosi even do with that?
Well, a few things are happening at once. Number one, Pelosi's becoming much more sharp toward Trump, and she got more sharp over the Easter holiday in a letter that she wrote to her colleagues. She basically said that she was praying for the president, as she frequently does, and he's been an abysmal leader. Her words, not mine. Number one. Number two, Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump. Nancy Pelosi is someone that Donald Trump has long respected. He said so publicly. He said, remember, back into the beginning of this Congress, he said he would make Pelosi speaker if Democrats abandoned her. So he thought she deserved the speakership. She admired him. He admired her for many years. Number three, it's really ironic because at this time, as Donald Trump is lambasting Pelosi, she and Chuck Schumer, two Democrats, are going to deliver Donald Trump another big package for the coronavirus stimulus that he's seeking. His administration is in intense negotiations with Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, and not Republicans, pointedly not Republicans as much as Democrats. So this is a sideshow, and it serves to illustrate, Nicole, something you and I have talked about a lot on air, which is the president is not involved in legislative negotiations. He's on the sidelines as some other people in his administration take the lead.
Do you see any issue? Is there a pet issue? Is there anything he's involved in? Is he wanting to make sure that his, either the states in which he calls home, I guess it would be Florida, not New York at this point. I mean, is he involved in anything?
He's definitely setting the tone. I mean, he's involved in a lot. He's the president, number one. But number two, he's setting the tone for this entire process. And you've seen some Democratic governors, some local officials praise him.
How's he setting the tone? He gets in the briefing room and runs political ads. Where is he setting the tone?
Well, that is the tone, right? I mean, that is the tone he is setting through these 2-hour-long briefings in the White House briefing room. It's an unconventional approach, to be sure, and it's unnerved a lot of Republicans and Democrats alike. But he is involved, but not in the meat and the substance of legislating, which is going to take, Congress is going to have a massive role going forward in getting the country back on its feet after this.
It's just amazing to abdicate, and I asked that question because he's going to want to look back on this period when the general election comes into focus in the fall, and there's no evidence he's involved in getting testing up and running. He's kicked that to the governors. There's no evidence anyone other than Mnuchin, I think, is involved in a lot of the stimulus. There are no fingerprints of his anywhere. Maybe that's a good thing. We'll keep asking the same questions, and I know you'll always have the reporting on it. Jake Sherman, nice to see your face, my friend.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks.
After the break, a closer look at the crisis unfolding and the tragedy right before our eyes.
This is an athlete.
Every generation inherits a sacred moral obligation to protect its most vulnerable, to look after those who maybe aren't as independent as they once were. To that end, as we sit here today, we face the prospect of a massive collective failure. Our nation's elderly, and by extension their families, are under attack. The coronavirus is sweeping through assisted living facilities with terrifying efficiency. The New York Times today reports the 10 deadliest clusters of coronavirus in the U.S. have been in nursing homes. More than 7,000 killed in all. Think about that. That's about a fifth of all coronavirus deaths in America happening just at our country's nursing homes. Heightened susceptibility to the disease combined with understaffed, under-equipped, and often overworked caregivers have resulted in a nightmare scenario for older Americans. We've seen the same sad story play out again and again. Not a return phone call for how your grandma or grandpa are doing, no updates on their condition. And in an effort to shine a light on what is still an underreported, underpaid attention to situation, as of Sunday, nursing homes are now required by law to report all COVID cases to the CDC. It's a step in the right direction, and yet we owe so much more, so much better to the greatest generation. The ones who stormed beaches, moved our society forward, in many instances raised us, cared for us, sacrificed so much so that we could prosper.
Absolutely.
So maybe go check out a neighbor. Reach out to someone you know in an assisted living facility or their sons or daughters or family members. Tell them you're thinking about them. If you happen to be in assistant care right now and you're watching to you, to your family members, to your kids, to their kids, we see you. We're thinking of you. We honor you, and we recognize our duty to do more, to do better, to protect you. That does it for this hour. Thank you for letting us into your homes during this extraordinary time. Our coverage continues with the fabulous Katie Tur right after a break.
Now that's good journalism. It may not be the news that you want to hear, but at least it's direct, it's to the point. It's not sugar-coated. It's to the point. And that's what we pay news anchors and our investigating journalists to do, is to give us the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. So help us God. As we say, and we'll continue to say, as long as we are on the air and can say it to our viewers, good luck to all of us. Good luck to each and every one of us as we face off on the things that we're going to have to face off on before Gable blows the trumpet and God comes back for his precious people. Thanks again, and shalom.